The man behind the glass counter slid the ring back across the scratched surface at 3:17 p.m. on a Thursday and told Kofi Akebe it was worth $22. Kofi looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he picked it up, put it in his palm, and looked at it for 4 seconds more. His children had not eaten since the night before. He said he would take the $22. The pawnbroker, a short man with a laminated name badge that read Jerome, didn't look up when he counted the bills. He was already reaching for the ring with a white-gloved hand before Kofi had finished tucking the money into the pocket of his trousers. A woman at the back of the shop, near a shelf of tangled bicycle chains and second-hand cameras, watched the whole thing. She did not look away. She already knew whose ring that was. Kofi Akebe was 41 years old and 6 feet exactly, though his shoulders had developed the slight forward curve of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. He smelled faintly of sawdust and machine oil, which was how he smelled on every weekday, and on most weekends too. He wore a gray work shirt with the name of a catering supply company embroidered over the left chest pocket, a company that had let him go 11 weeks earlier when the contract with the hotel group expired and nobody renewed it. He kept wearing the shirt because it was the cleanest thing he owned that did not have a stain below the collar. His wife, Nkechi, had died 14 months before of a cardiac event that the doctor described in language Kofi had to ask him to repeat 3 times before he understood it. She had been at the market on a Tuesday morning buying yams and tinned tomatoes when it happened. A woman at the next stall had found her sitting on the ground, very still, holding her shopping bag. Kofi had been at work when the call came. He had sat in the parking lot of the catering supply company for 23 minutes before he could make himself start the truck. He had 2 children. Tobena was 8 years old and the kind of boy who paid attention to everything without seeming to. Adaisy was 5 and had her mother's mouth and her mother's habit of tilting her head slightly to the left when she was working something out. Kofi cooked for them every night from whatever was in the house, and when there was nothing in the house, he walked to the Ghanaian shop on Fulham Road and bought whatever he could on credit from Mr. Owusu Boateng, who kept a ledger behind the counter and never once mentioned it in front of the children. The ring had been his mother's. She had worn it every day for 31 years on the 3rd finger of her right hand, and when she died, 7 years before Nkechi, of complications from a surgery she never fully recovered from, she had asked Kofi to hold it for her grandchildren when the time was right. It was yellow gold, thin, with a single small stone set in a simple claw mount. Kofi had kept it in the left inner pocket of his jacket since the day he buried her, in a small cloth pouch she had sewn herself from a piece of kente fabric that had come from Kumasi. He had not shown it to anyone in 7 years. He had not planned to sell it. But Tobena had come downstairs at 6:40 that morning and opened the refrigerator and stood there looking at the inside of it the way a child looks at something that does not make sense. And Kofi had understood then that things could not wait any longer. He walked the 23 minutes back to their flat on Deptford High Street from the pawnbroker's shop. He carried a plastic bag from the convenience store with a box of pasta, a tin of chopped tomatoes, a small block of cheese, and a carton of milk. The February air was sharp and damp, and the kind of cold that came in through the gaps in his jacket. By the time he reached the building, the tips of his fingers were numb. He sat on the front step for a moment before going inside, not because he was resting, but because he needed the distance between where he had been and where he was going. He did not tell the children about the ring. He made the pasta with the tomatoes and grated cheese over the top, the way Nkechi used to make it, and Tobena and Adaisy ate it at the kitchen table under the light that still had a dead bulb on the left side. He had been meaning to replace it for 3 weeks. He put Adaisy to bed at 7:30 and read to her from a book about a girl who could talk to elephants that she had borrowed from school and not returned. At 9:15, after Tobena was asleep, Kofi sat at the kitchen table with his phone and went through the same numbers he had been going through every night for 2 weeks. The math did not change. He had applied to 11 jobs in the past month. 2 had not responded. 4 had replied to say the position was filled. 3 had asked him to complete online assessments that took 90 minutes each, and then never contacted him again. 1 had called him for a phone interview, and the woman who called had been warm and said the team was very interested. And then 3 days later, he received a standard rejection email. The 11th application was still pending. At 11:22 p.m., he closed his phone, washed the dishes, and went to bed. He lay on his back in the dark and listened to the building. Someone above him was watching something with a low rumbling sound. The pipes in the wall made a ticking noise. He counted the ticks until he stopped counting. He did not know that the woman from the pawnbroker's shop was at that moment sitting in a car outside the building. Her name was Constance Owusu-Mensah. She was 63 years old and had the kind of stillness about her that people sometimes mistook for severity until she spoke, and then mistook for patience until they had known her long enough to understand it was neither. It was attention. She had learned to pay very close attention to the things most people looked past, because she had spent 17 years doing exactly that kind of work. First as a case officer, then as a regional director for a charitable foundation that operated across 3 boroughs. She had retired from the foundation 9 months earlier. She had not stopped paying attention. She knew the ring because she had seen it before. She had seen it in a photograph, in an archive, in a file she had held in her hands 14 years ago and never fully let go of. Her car was a dark green 2019 Volvo with 81,000 miles on the clock and a crack in the rear passenger window she had been meaning to have fixed since October. She sat in it for a while, looking at the front of the building. Then she drove home to Peckham. She did not sleep well. She was back on Deptford High Street at 8:04 the following morning, sitting on a bench near the bus stop with a paper cup of tea when she saw Kofi come out of the building with the children. Tobena had a backpack that had seen better years. Daisy was wearing her coat buttoned wrong, and Kofi crouched down on the pavement and rebuttoned it from the bottom. Slowly, the way someone does a thing they have done so many times, it has become a kind of prayer. If this story is already doing what I think it is, stay with me. Because what Constance found out next is something Kofi was never supposed to know. She waited until he had dropped the children at school and was walking back along the high street before she moved from the bench. She walked at enough of a distance that he would not notice her. But she did not need to follow him far. He stopped at the corner shop, bought a newspaper he spent a long time looking at, then sat at the window table of a small cafe and did not order anything. The cafe owner, a Ghanaian woman with a yellow head wrap, brought him tea without being asked. He nodded. She patted the back of his hand once and went back behind the counter. Constance stepped inside. She sat down at the table nearest to his. She ordered tea. She looked at him for a moment and then she said, quietly, without introduction, "Excuse me. The ring you sold yesterday. I'd like to talk to you about it." Kofi looked at her. He set the newspaper down slowly. He had the face of a man working out whether he was in trouble or in something else entirely. "It was my mother's," he said. "I know," Constance said. "That's why I'm here." She reached into her bag and placed on the table between them a small photograph. It was black and white, printed on the kind of paper that photographs were printed on before everything became digital. It showed a woman at a celebration of some kind. There was a table with food, other people around the edges of the frame who had been caught mid-movement. The woman in the center was young, perhaps 25, and she was laughing at something outside the frame. On her right hand, third finger, was a ring. Thin band. Single stone. Simple claw mount. Kofi picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. He put it back down. "That's her," he said. "That's my mother." "Yes," Constance said. Her name was Abena Akebe. She was a teacher. She taught mathematics at a secondary school in Kumasi for 23 years. In 1987, she was nominated for a Teaching Excellence Award by the Regional Education Authority. She did not receive the award. The file containing her nomination, along with 17 others from that year, was lost in an administrative reorganization. Constance folded her hands on the table. I was the person who found that file. 14 years ago. I was working with a foundation that had been commissioned to review historical education records in the region for a recognition program. The file had been sitting in a storage room in Accra for 15 years. Kofi was very still. The recognition program, Constance continued, was eventually funded through an endowment. It was designed to locate the nominees who had never been recognized and provide a formal acknowledgement and a financial grant to them or where the original nominee had died. To their direct family. The CAF owner was wiping the counter across the room with her back turned. The sound of the street came through the window glass, muffled and continuous. "My mother died 7 years ago," Kofi said. "I know. We found that too." Constance opened her bag and took out a folder. Inside the folder were several printed pages. She did not slide them across to him yet. It took the foundation several years to trace all the nominees' families. Yours took longer because there were 2 different spellings of your surname in the records. We located you 8 months ago through the London records. 8 months. We have been trying to reach you. We wrote to an address in Lewisham. We sent 2 letters. I moved 14 months ago, Kofi said. My wife, he stopped. He looked at the table. We moved after my wife died. I've been at Deptford since then. Constance opened the folder and placed the first page in front of him. It was a formal letter, printed on the letterhead of the Abena Boateng Educational Trust, named for a Ghanaian educator who had died in 2003 and whose family had funded the endowment. The letter was addressed to Kofi Akebe, the son of Abena Akebe, Naboaten. It confirmed that Abena Akebe's 1987 nomination had been formally reviewed and recognized. It confirmed that as the sole surviving direct heir, Kofi Akebe was entitled to the family recognition grant. The amount on the page was £14,800. He read the number twice. He set the page down on the table very carefully, as though the paper were something that could break. Then he picked up the photograph of his mother again. She was laughing at something outside the frame, and on her hand was the ring that was now sitting in a glass case on the counter of a pawnshop on Old Kent Road, tagged at £45, which was what Jerome charged for it after doubling his 22. There's one more thing, Constance said. She placed the second page in front of him. It was a copy of a supplementary document from the Trust's most recent board meeting. 3 months earlier, the Trust's board, chaired by a retired judge named Chief Kwame Mensah, who sat on the board of 4 charitable foundations, and spoke with the economy of a man who had said everything he needed to say and was now simply deciding things, had voted to expand the recognition grants to include an additional educational support component for grantees' children. The amount was a separate line. Kofi read it. Then he looked up at Constance. For each child, she said. He put both pages down. The cafe owner brought a second cup of tea to the table without being asked, and placed it in front of Kofi and went back to the counter without saying anything. Kofi sat with his hands flat on the table on either side of the papers. His breathing had changed. He did not speak for a while, and Constance let the quiet sit because she had learned a long time ago that some things needed the space. "Can we get the ring back?" he said finally. "That," said Constance, "is the first thing we will do this morning." She drove. He sat in the passenger seat of the green Volvo with the cracked rear window and did not speak much. Constance had called the shop before they left the cafe. She had done this kind of work long enough to know that the order of operations mattered, and that it was always better to make the call before the arrival. Jerome confirmed the ring was still in the case. It had not sold. It had been there for less than 24 hours. Constance told him they were coming. Jerome was behind the counter when they came in. He had the ring out already, set on a square of black velvet on the glass surface. He looked at Kofi, and then at Constance, and then back at Kofi. He slid the ring across without ceremony. Constance placed 22 pounds on the counter in the exact bills Jerome had handed Kofi the day before. Jerome looked at the money for a moment, then at the ring, then at the two people standing in front of him. He pushed the money back. "Keep it," he said. "I didn't know." Kofi picked up the ring. He held it in his right hand and looked at it the way he had looked at it for 4 seconds the day before, except this time he did not put it down. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, in the same place where the cloth pouch used to be, and he pressed his hand flat against his chest for a moment. Then he turned around and walked out of the shop. Within the following 6 weeks, the trust formally transferred £14,800 to an account opened in Kofi Achebe's name at a branch of Barclays on New Cross Road. The children's educational support grants, £4,200 per child, were placed in separate trust-managed accounts administered by the foundation and linked to school enrollment records. A trust administrator named Pauline made 3 appointments at the foundation's Peckham office to walk Kofi through the documentation. And on the 3rd appointment, she stayed an hour past her scheduled time because Tobena had come with his father and had questions about how interest worked that Pauline, who had studied economics at the University of Ghana before life had taken her in a different direction, found, she said later, genuinely impressive for an 8-year-old. Chief Kwame Mensah, who chaired the trust's board, received a report of the case at the following quarterly meeting. He read it in full. He requested one addition to the trust's outreach procedures: a mandatory secondary contact search for any grantee family where the primary address produced no response within 60 days. He did not dramatize the instruction. He said it once, quietly, and the board secretary wrote it down, and it became policy. The dead bulb on the left side of the kitchen light in the flat on Deptford High Street was replaced on a Saturday morning in March. Adeze watched Kofi change it from the doorway, with her head tilted slightly to the left, working something out. When the light came on fully, she went back to the table without saying anything and finished her breakfast. The ring did not go back into the cloth pouch. Kofi placed it on his own right hand, 3rd finger, and wore it there. On the days when Tobena asked about his grandmother, which happened more often now, for reasons Kofi could not fully explain but did not question, Kofi would hold out his hand and let the boy look at it, and sometimes Tobena would hold his father's hand while he looked, and Kofi would tell him one thing about her that he had not told him before: the way she organized her desk, the specific formulas she used when she explained equations to students who were afraid of mathematics, which was that she told them the number was not the enemy. The number was only trying to show you something. The sound of her laugh, which was the kind of laugh that made other people in the room laugh too before they even knew what was funny. Constance came back once, in April, with a box of walkie from a takeaway near the Peckham office, which she placed on Kofi's kitchen table while Pauline went through the remaining paperwork. She said she had been meaning to come earlier. Kofi made tea for everyone. Adaize showed Constance the elephant book she had finally returned to school and then taken out again on library card. Constance read her 3 pages of it, sitting at the kitchen table, while the adults talked in the background. Before she left, Constance stopped at the door and looked at the light on the left side of the kitchen. "You fixed that," she said. "Last month," Kofi said. She nodded. She went downstairs. The world does not always see the record it is standing in the presence of. 23 years of mathematics teaching. 17 nominations for recognition. Files moved into storage rooms and forgotten, not because anyone decided they didn't matter, but because no one decided that they did. That is how most things are lost, not in one deliberate act, but in the accumulated weight of no one looking closely enough. A woman sold her ring to pay for her children's food, and that ring carried her into a room she was never supposed to be in, and the room gave her something back that had been hers for 37 years. There are documents sitting in storage rooms right now that belong to someone who has been living as though they have nothing. There are names in ledgers that nobody has opened. Some of them will stay there, but some of them will not. You cannot take away what a person built with their hands and their years and their mind. You can file it incorrectly. You can move it to a room that nobody enters. You can address the letters to an old house. But the work remains. The nomination remains. The name remains. And eventually, not always, but sometimes, in a pawn shop on a Thursday afternoon at 3:17, when the right person happens to be standing near the right shelf, what was overlooked gets found. Here is what I want to ask you. If a document existed somewhere, in an archive, in a storage room, in a file that had been sitting untouched for 15 years, that proved someone you loved had deserved more than they were given, and finding that document would change something real for the people they left behind, who would you want to be the person who opened that room? And if you have the power to open a room like that for someone right now, what is stopping you from doing it? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.